We often think of slavery in this country as a phenomenon of agriculture and working the land. But during, before, and after the Civil War, thousands of African Americans made significant contributions to railroad history by building bridges, grading lines, and blasting tunnels.
Many of them were escaped slaves from the South. By the time they'd crossed over into Union territory, they were called contraband. And at first, the Union troops thought, well, their skills would best be used to cut down trees. Well, they discovered that many of them were very skilled mechanics.
They were operating outside of Union lines, so there was always the danger that either Confederate forces or other troops, guerrillas such as Mosby's Rangers, could come up and attack them and either kill them or take them prisoner. And essentially, if an African American, whether they were a freedman or a freeman, whether they were escaped slave or they had been born free, if they were caught by the Confederacy, oftentimes they were taken south and enslaved or re-enslaved. So it was great danger to these wood choppers to be out here doing this work, but to them it was a very personal war. For them, they were looking for their own freedom. The African Americans, the slaves or the former slaves, were fighting for their own lives and for the lives of their children to be free.
The South pursued railroad expansion as fast as the North. Railroads were associated with modernization and the future.
The Orange and Alexandria Railroad was traveled in 1861 by the new Confederate General Robert E. Lee when he made that commitment to head up the Confederate troops. And it became very clear to him that this would be a significant component of the subsequent battles and the war yet to come.
In 1861, at the Battle of Manassas, the Union was taking advantage and really had basically defeated the Confederates. Towards the end of the day, all of a sudden there were fresh Confederates that were brought in from western Virginia on rail, marched into it, and so those fresh troops were able to overcome our Union soldiers. The Civil War is the first war in which the railroad is used to actually move troops into active combat. The railroads were extremely critical. Unfortunately, the Confederates like to come along and burn bridges, and they've done this numerous times along here. But we do have an individual, Herman Haupt, who has developed ways to build prefab bridges down in Alexandria shops and bring them out here, and then the contraband can help assemble those bridges so that a burned bridge can be replaced on this line within a day's time.
So these gentlemen, all working on the railroad, were at constant risk for a Confederate attack that would then take them and capture them and take them back home, and beyond being severely mistreated upon being taken back, of course, would be the return to slavery. So a very kind of sad reality.
Confederate Railroad turned against the Confederacy, challenging the South's vision as a modern society. The railroad was an avenue slaves were taking to freedom. In August 1862, when Union forces retreated up the line toward Washington, African American families went with them. Colonel William Wright, engineer and superintendent of the U.S. military railroads, wrote about this exodus. The contrabands fairly swarmed about the Fredericksburg and Falmouth stations, and there was a continuous black line of men, women, and children moving north along the railroad, carrying all their worldly goods on their heads. Every train running to Aquia was crowded with them. More than 10,000 contrabands walked or rode on the tracks north toward freedom in 1 week.
4 million slaves, probably, in the South during that whole window of time and before, because slavery had been part of our country's past, sadly. Many of them really wouldn't be safe until they got well into Ohio and even crossed Lake Erie on into Canada. Only about 400,000 were able to escape.
Many nameless African American heroes contributed to the Orange and Alexandria Railroad, which contributed to success of the federal troops. The entire operation required constant employment of 300 plus men and many, many more woodchoppers to support the fuel needed for the railroad. Over half of all railroad workers in Virginia were African American in 1880. A whole generation of African American workers came out of the Civil War